What's up, guys? Today we're going to be hooking up the Dutch Brothers Crazy 8 lift to the 68 Dodge Charger. My buddy Eric DeGraff and I came up with these. We designed them, I don't know, it was probably over 10 years ago. And we take them to car shows and stuff and sell them and sold them online and stuff, but we are no longer doing it, so sorry, don't bother to ask. But anyway, I still have my toolkit and I'm happy that I have it. This basically attaches to the frame rails where the bumper brackets would attach, and then we're going to use a cherry picker because we don't have a lift. We're going to use a cherry picker to lift the body away from the drivetrain so that we can pull this 440 and trans out of this car. So enjoy the ride. Alright, so there's the Dutch Brothers Crazy 8 lift. I'll show you. Use the factory bolts, the bumper bracket bolts. Basically, this piece attaches to the frame rail. This cross piece just slides in there. And this piece attaches on this side. So, alright. Alright, so the second part of this, pulling the engine from the bottom, is our engine dolly. We came up with this to attach to the engine block and the transmission, and then this cradles inside of our engine dolly. And then you just have to take everything loose. So I've got the transmission linkage loose. I still got to take the trans mount loose. We'll do that after we get the engine dolly in here. And then we start taking the K-member loose. I've got a bunch of stuff on the top of the motor to take loose, like the throttle cable and stuff and any electrical wiring. So So this is what the bracket looks like. It just utilizes the bolt holes that go into the transmission through the block on both sides. Basically the very bottom big bolt. Something I should point out. With the exhaust manifolds, it's pretty easy because the exhaust stops way up here, wherever it is, right here. And the exhaust is completely out of the way. Well, with headers come in here and they get really tight to this area. So if you're, not that you can buy this, but you'll see when this goes back in, I'm gonna have headers on it, but you basically got to leave the headers loose to clear all of this. And then when you get it into the car and take this off, then you can cinch down the headers from there. Alright, it's going to be too difficult to have the camera here while I'm trying to get this loose, but there's a roll pin right there. You got to knock through the steering knuckle so that we can pull the column loose and pull it out of the way. I'm going to leave the, when I drop this, I'm going to drop it from the K-member, so the steering box is going to be attached to the K-member still. So we need to detach the steering column from the steering box. Some of the things that you could potentially forget. So we've got the throttle linkage, or the throttle cable. We still need to detach from the engine. The neutral safety switch still needs to be unplugged. I do have the drive shaft out. And then it's just easier because it's easier to pull the alternator out of the way because it hangs out so close. It's really close to that frame rail, and it's pretty easy to pull out at this point. So we just pulled it out, and then I just use hose cutters to cut the fuel line there because we're gonna put all new fuel line and stuff on there. So that's where we're at. All right, got my trusty rechargeable solar panel flashlight here so I can see. And I punched that roll pin out, which is right here. And I used a punch to do it. Can't really see if it's got a size, but it's it's a little bit smaller, but it's big enough to grab the edge of the roll pin and punch it out, and then just smack it with a hammer. So I got to pull the steering column loose from inside the car, then we can pull the column back, and then we can drop the engine down. Alright, so inside the car, I'm just going to walk you through it so I don't have to set up lighting and stuff. There's 4 screws that hold this plastic cover on around the column. There's 2 on the bottom, and then those 2 right there. Then underneath, you got to pull that guy loose, that guy, and then there's one. If I can get it on camera, right there. Those 3 loose pull the column separate from the dash, and then there's 4 that go through this plate to the firewall. You got to pull those 4 out, and then everything, the steering column can come down, and then we can pull it back away from the steering box. So I'm not going to record that. I'm just going to do it, and hopefully we've got a few more things to take apart, and then we can start pulling the drivetrain out of it. Alright, I got the bolts out from that plate, steering column plate to the firewall. Got that rear bolt out. I got this nut almost out. There's 2 nuts on this side. One to hold that up, and then you put this ground on there and put another nut. Pull these off. It's almost like a threaded washer. It actually is like a threaded washer. So, and then that's it. Now, see, the column is down through the firewall, and now we need to pull it back. So, best way to pull it back, or the best way to break it loose from the steering box, in my opinion, is with a pickle fork. I go down in here, get the pickle fork between the coupler and the steering box, and just pry it. Oops. There. So, let me get the light on. Alright, so there you go. So, steering column is now loose from the steering box. I'm going to go ahead and pull it back a little bit further. I'm going to leave that greasy coupler hanging on the firewall side, but I'm just going to pull it back so it clears when we lift the car up. Alright, next thing I gotta take loose is the neutral safety switch. On 68s and older, it's got a one wire. On the 69 and later, it's got like a plastic plug that has 3 prongs on the neutral safety switch, and then the fitting just snaps on there. Alright, so I'm going to pull that out. I'm not going to record it. And here's the neutral safety switch disconnected. I put the nut back on there so I don't lose it. Alright, so while the car is still kind of high, I'm going to go ahead and loosen the bolts through the trans mount just to get the nuts off. I'm going to leave the bolts in. Obviously, I don't want the transmission to come falling down. And then once the nuts are off, we're going to lower the car down to the dolly, pull these jack stands out, and then I can pull those bolts out. I'm going to leave the trans mount bolted to the transmission, pull the bolts out, and then pull the K-member bolts loose, and then we can lift the body from the drivetrain. That's the plan. Alright, so we got the whole car is basically sitting on this engine dolly. The piece that I attached to the block and the trans is cradled inside the engine dolly, and all that's left to do now is to pull the K-member bolts and pull the bolts out of the trans mount, and then we can hoist the car up away from the drivetrain. Alright. The socket you need to get the K-member bolts out is 1 1/16. Pretty good size bolts. I'm going to put this rear K-member bolt back in. It's making me nervous. I'm trying to back this out, and you can see the K-member pulling away from the frame. I think it's the angle, because the ground I'm on is not very flat, and the K-member is wanting to swing down. So I'm going to put this one back in so I don't get this one to get to the last thread and then pull through. Alright, K-member's out. Alright, I put a jack at the end of the tail shaft on the transmission, and I jacked up the transmission to take the load off of the trans support so that I can knock the bolts out. Because with all the weight on there, you can't get the bolts out, they want to hit the threads. So I took the weight off, knocked the bolts out. It's completely free. I'm going to lower the trans. And okay, all the weight's off. And then I'm going to take a crowbar, see if I can pry the trans mount away. Okay, it looks like it's going to be loose and be fine. So I think as soon as I start to jack up the car, it should come apart okay. Alright, I think I have everything loose, but I'm going to jack it up really slow. There's always some electrical wire that's hung up on something or still connected. So we're going to go up really, really slow. But if everything's good and disconnected like I think it is, we'll see the body separate from the drivetrain. Just gonna take another look. Everything looks good so far. We're okay. Okay, we're back. So what was squeaking was the exhaust pipe, which is still on the manifold, was hitting the proportioning valve, but it's really not a proportioning valve. It's just a distribution block on Mopar. But it's all good. It was just barely rubbing, so it's no big deal. Now, that was the fuel filter on the passenger side, wedging between the frame rail and the exhaust manifold. Look. Okay. And there you go. Now I'll have to pull the all thread going through the carburetor for the air cleaner off to clear the frame rail, and now I can slide the whole drivetrain out from underneath the car. There you go. That's how you pull a 440 out. Well, it's one way you pull a 440 out. So if you're gonna do front suspension and brakes and all that stuff anyway, this is the best way because everything from the bottom comes out easy and it's gonna go back in easy. If you're not doing a front suspension kit, then, you know, I guess you're just swapping a motor, do it from the top. It sucks, but it's doable.